Hello, I'm Toycat, and something hugely unprecedented has just happened in American politics because the US President, Joe Biden, has just said that he will not be seeking re-election. In America, you get to serve 2 terms as president, and so not serving the second usually means, outside of assassinations and whatnot, that either your party didn't select you or the country didn't select you. You lost an election, and so it's weird when your party does select you and then they sort of don't, is what happened here. And so now comes the question of, given that there are 2 major parties in the US, who is going to be the major contender to fight against Trump now? Who is going to be the next presidential candidate from the Democratic Party? And more importantly, do they stand a chance against the current favorite, Mr. Donald Trump himself? There are lots of very good questions that I want to hopefully give you answers to today, because this is very, very unprecedented. I want to dive into the closest situation that has happened to this, because it was a very long time ago, and also explain what is going down right now, because obviously Mr. Joe Biden has decided he will stand down, saying it is in the best interest of my party and my country, something that is probably unexpected. I mean, obviously, if you follow this channel, we spoke about this a couple of days ago, but it's something that's become an increasing amount of pressure from major senior officials ever since his disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump. It's something where, regardless of your political position, it's just kind of like sad. Like, again, not like sad because, oh, I don't like politics or whatever, but like sad because, like, man, this is a very old person who probably shouldn't be doing any major senior job, who is currently in charge of the world's largest military and second largest nuclear arsenal. It's something which a lot of people looked at and went, ooh, is that our guy? And most voters think that Democrats have a better chance of keeping the White House if Biden isn't the nominee. Is something that came out a while ago. Around 3/4 of voters were like, yeah, you should just replace him at this point. And this puts the party in a little bit of a crisis. In fact, such a crisis that right now they've had to, the DNC as they are called, the Democratic National Committee, have had to have an emergency meeting. So in America, as I'm sure you're familiar, there is largely a 2-party system. Unlike many other countries where this kind of comes about purely naturally, in the US there are lots of systems that basically allow for the first 2 parties to have all sorts of little benefits. And one of the weird parts about America not being a parliamentary system is that both of these parties have not just the elected officials for that party and then the members, but also all sorts of people can register as a Democrat or a Republican, but also there is the Democratic National Committee, who is a whole body of people who aren't necessarily elected, and these are the people who run the party, more or less. To be clear, the Republicans also have the exact same thing, the RNC, which is also in Washington, D.C., a probably smart place to put it, but there are, that both the parties have their own party apparatus, and these work in very different ways, but now the Democratic Party has to work out who's gonna be in charge there, and there is only one candidate who stands out right now. The reason for that is that Biden, after standing down and after saying, yeah, I'm not gonna do this, he said that I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to become the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. And so, yeah, they are hoping to get the first woman president that way, as well as, a couple of other accolades, I'm sure. First Indian president, I think it would be too. And yeah, there is a really, really, really big movement around the party to be like, well, I guess logically speaking, if he was to, die in some way, then she would be our choice. And so maybe if he's not to die, but he's just going to decide against it, maybe that should make them his choice as again too, because obviously she is the current vice president. She was elected in some way. Whenever you vote for a president in the United States, you're also voting for a vice president, and so it's the closest thing they have to an elected official. And so, yeah, fun fact, by the way, I love how fast Wikipedia gets to stuff like this. But yeah, there is a bit of a weird void that is currently going to have to be filled, and the most likely candidate is the vice president, of course, but that's only the most likely candidate. In theory, they can select whoever they want, because the only time this has happened before, the closest thing I could find to this, it says right here that, like, well, weirdly enough, the last time this happened was in 1968, where the incumbent US president realized the Vietnam War was too unpopular. That's the closest time this has happened. I really tried to scroll for as much a similar situation that has happened in the past, and after looking at all the major things, it's like, yeah, 1968 is the closest you get, but even in 1968, where, by the way, this is the set of people that run right there, but in 1968, they held a presidential primary still, which is basically where the voters for each party decide who their candidate is going to be. The 2-party system means that only 2 people have a chance of being president, if you believe in that whole thing, and so as a result, you have to be able to pick your one guy to be against the other guy. If you only get 2 choices, you should at least have a say in who one of those people is going to be. And so the 1968 primary, the election to decide who's going to go to the election, actually had Eugene McCarthy have the largest largest percent of the vote. Most of the delegates went to Robert F. Kennedy, by the way, but he was actually assassinated. And so because he was assassinated, the people who said they were going to vote for him were allowed to change their votes. And so eventually the guy who had 2.2% of the vote actually ended up being the candidate. And then he ended up losing, not by a huge number of votes to be fair, but by a huge number of consequential votes. And then he was kind of forgotten by history. But it's an important thing to mention that that's what happened last time. This time they do not have such a luxury. We can scroll all the way through here if you want to see some weird ones. Like it's interesting, all the sorts of candidates who like come through here, and you know, sometimes the candidates who win really successfully in a general election win by very small amounts in the primary elections. Like, okay, Bill Clinton did pretty well in his primary and obviously did really well in the next one, but then it's like, yeah, actually there are all sorts of people who people probably assume would be better candidates and didn't win in the end. Like in 2008, did you know Hillary Clinton was almost the nominee by like a very tiny amount, her deciding not to be? And so yeah, it's a very interesting thing. But if we scroll through to 2024, they already decided who they wanted to be their presidential candidate, and that was Joe Biden. I mean, obviously, there's a few people getting like 3% of the vote or 0.1% of the vote, but they didn't win any delegates, and so now all of these people are pledged to say that they should have Joe Biden be the next president, except now they can't do that. He said that he won't, and so what are you meant to do? This is the complicated bit, right? This is the whole, well, what comes next question. There is going to be a convention happening in August, and at that convention, they, again, not the people have had their say, and their say is being turned down. The party apparatus has to decide who will be the candidate. Obviously, the vice president is the most likely one, but in theory, if they all agree on someone, if they all agree on, let's look at the odds right here. If they all agree on Gavin Newsom, or Michelle Obama, or Gretchen Whitmer, or even Hillary Clinton, it's not impossible, fun fact, but they can agree on basically anyone. Josh Shapiro, I don't even know these names at this point, where if they wanted to, they could agree that there's going to be some real silly ones. Donald Trump Jr., that would be a spicy presidential race, or we could obviously also have Bernie Sanders, or Mark Zuckerberg, Kanye West. Oh, Kanye West, that's a good pick right there. But they can agree on basically anyone, and as long as there is general consensus around it, that is who the next presidential candidate is going to be. So let's just say for a second, I think to be simple, let's say it's not going to be Kanye West, and instead it's going to be Kamala Harris. What does her polls against Trump look like? Honestly, disastrous. You'd figure like, oh, anyone will do better than Biden, right? Like if you look at Biden versus Trump polls, it's like, yeah, well, you know, he's behind. But that's because he's had 4 years of government behind him. You know, elected officials always look worse once they're in government, because when you're an opposition candidate, you can be like, yeah, here's what I would do, and no one can fact check it. But when you say, as the incumbent president, here's what I would do, everyone goes, why didn't you do it then? You had power. You don't get to say, wow, who's the president? I'd like to have a word with him and change his mind. You are the president. And so there's always a thing there. But the fact that as vice president, just as, you know, basically as an unknown, Harris is trailing Trump hugely until she was deemed to be the nominee. Basically, she picked up a lot of anti-Trump support, but that's not really enough to win, right? Maybe with a good campaign, Kamala Harris is the best bet they've got here. But I think that, yeah, it doesn't look very good, and I can't imagine that there's anyone who particularly does very good against Mr. Trump in this one. They haven't even polled anyone else yet, and so it results in a bit of a struggle. I think the only you could probably argue the third party guy. I don't think a lot of Democrats would like him though. That there are a lot of hard choices to be made here, and I don't favor the people who have to make them, because either, you know, their big evil party that have been planning this all along. I mean, literally, Joe Biden did say that he would serve one term if elected. It was like a quiet pledge that he made to an assistant. So it was something that it wasn't like very enforced. People didn't come out against him for this one or anything. But it was heavily suggested that he was only going to have one term, and then later the party could kind of come together that way. But if this was his plan all along, then the best time to do it would have probably been like, you know, when was the primary held? Like a little bit ago, you know. I felt like sometime before January of this year would have been the best time to work that out. Doing it now does put things into a bit of chaos, and then that raises the big question of, was it the plan all along? I don't want to, you know, just to have a little second here, I want to mention something kind of odd. In 1968, the last time that this happened, the president stood down. What actually happened is the people, the Democratic voters by and large, were selecting Eugene McCarthy. I feel like I know McCarthy for one thing, and I wouldn't have guessed that it was for being a Democrat. But so Eugene McCarthy was the favorite with the popular people, right? Maybe you could say Robert F. Kennedy was, depending on how you measure people and states and whatnot. And so interestingly, as it says literally right here, Hubert Humphrey was the first. He was like a late entrant, and he did not criticize the administration, instead kind of like towing the party line a little bit more. And so what happens? Well, there was an assassination. Oh, is there an assassination this time around too? And then instead of the people getting their way, you know, the main party candidate got in instead. And obviously he didn't become president, so, you know, that's a thing. But assassination followed by a primary where the president does not sit and where the people do not get their say anyway is, it's an interesting case that's almost repeating right here. But such is the weird case of US politics. I think, oh look, there we go. This has happened in the recording of this video. One of the potential successors to Biden has come out and said some nice things about him. There is a very, very crazy thing. It's all fallen apart, as mentioned here, but what happens next is genuinely quite unprecedented, but probably is going to be something that makes people unhappy anyway. All I know is that I placed a bet on Donald. I'm going to tell you my bet now. I placed a bet on the guy who isn't Donald Trump, the guy sitting all the way down here at, what are his odds right now? Okay, he's not out yet. He's got 250 to 1. I placed a bet on the guy who's currently 250 to 1 to win, and I feel like I lost my 19 pounds now. I was financially invested in you, America, and you let me down. Anyone out there who did that to me, I'm very disappointed in you, and that's all I have to say. Seriously though, yeah, pretty crazy election. It looks as though the odds-on favorite by a lot is Trump, and I don't see anyone who is changing that in a major way. It has to be a very good campaign, and that, from that perspective, I think it's kind of clever to pull a switcheroo. Like, the whole Republican attack on the Democrats has been, he's too old. Even right now, there's people saying like, yeah, he's just, you know, he's too old. He was unfit. He's not mentally there. And then it's like, okay, we switched to a young candidate, and now all your attacks suddenly start landing on yourself. It might be the best political play ever, or it might be the stupidest. The only thing that we'll say for sure is the future, and in the future it'll be really obvious what the right decision was. But right now it looks like Trump doesn't have to worry about too much. It seems though. Anyway, with that said, I hope you all enjoyed today's second channel video. If you would like, you could consider perhaps, if you're really into it, becoming a member of the Patreon. It allows me to buy lobster rolls and kebabs and definitely not increase the quality of the videos on this channel whatsoever. And otherwise, subscribe if you want to decide what comes to you on your homepage. And if you don't want to, then have a good one either way. I had a Chicago-style pizza today, by the way. You know, it's just as a fun, you know, not going to drop a hint at who's going to be the next, you know, president or anything, but I did have a Chicago-style pizza. And so, you know, in Chicago in August, maybe keep an eye out on your boy, the new Democratic candidate. It's not going to be me. I've got things to do this November. But if I wasn't busy, they would have picked me. I'm pretty sure, at least. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you never. Second channel. Don't care. Look at that, by the way. You could see there's like there's a spike of it. There's a if we go to like the last 24 hours here. Oh, you can't actually see last 24 hours. But if you look at the last 60 minutes or last 48 hours, there's been a sudden spike in my view count for the last video. I wonder why that is. Okay. Second channel. Don't care. Bye.